Hi, everyone. My name is Mia Remar. I lead our talent development team here at Lattice, and I am so thrilled to get to speak with you all today about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, engagement in this economy. This is such an important topic because engagement is at an all-time low. Sarah spoke about this morning, but it's been highest on HR's priority list for the past 4 years running. And what is it that is so hard to unlock about engagement? And especially, what does it look like amidst economic headwinds that we're all experiencing? So our panel today will highlight the key challenges of supporting engagement at different size companies and cultures, and how to think about engaging employees when the business needs it most. So joining us today is a very talented panel that I've become, I think, just y'all are my friends now. We've had so much fun prepping for this, but I'll let them introduce themselves. So I'm going to pass it over to Deborah.
My name is Deborah, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Sparrow, which is a company that makes it simple for other companies to provide their employees with leave using a blend of technology and service. We are a 220-person company across 40 states, and I would say we've scaled remotely, and with that, engagement has always been very near and dear to my heart, and something that we're thinking about a lot.
Awesome. Well, I guess I'm next. My name is DeShawn Barrett. I am the Director of Talent Development at SpotHero. And if you don't know what SpotHero is, it's a parking reservation app. You can do it online or on the app, and we are based in Chicago, so that's where I live. However, we have locations all across we have locations in the U.S. and in Canada, offices, and we're about 250 people, and that's me.
Hey, hi everyone. My name is Tess. I'm an HR business partner at a company called Betterment. We are a financial wellness platform. We are headquartered in New York City and just about around 500 people today, and I'm very excited to be here. I used to work actually down near the Ferry building, so this feels like a full circle moment for me right now.
Well, we're thrilled to have you here, and this panel has such a diverse background. I'm so glad that we have the voice of the HR team. I'm so glad that we have the voice of an executive here. So, let's start with the hot topic. Why is engagement still so elusive, even after years of it being on the top priority list for HR teams? And do y'all think we're actually aligned on what engagement even means?
I mean, I'll start.
Yeah.
I think, when it comes to engagement, we all have a different point of view on what that is, and so that's why it's so elusive. One thing that I like to do is, start with an analogy. So we're all human, we're all people. We have eyes, we have ears, we have hands, we have feet. They all have different needs, they all have different uses. And then you bring that to the company and the business world, and you have a company that has different departments, and each department has their own need, and the goal is to connect them to what is the bigger purpose, what is our vision, our goals, and how then can you connect that to the success that they want and that they need in their careers, ultimately in order for us to achieve our top company goals.
That too, DeShawn, and I think that to your question, part of the reason why I think it's so elusive is because the world is constantly changing around us, and so with that, engagement is also changing, and so companies are really challenged to kind of think in new ways and challenge their perspectives and really change and adopt things. I know at Betterment we have recently restructured kind of how we do engagement and looked at our questions, and we decided to reduce the number of questions and really have a more pointed focus of what is important for our company. Specifically, we're looking at career growth as kind of an area that we think is important. That's something that we pride ourselves at the company. So in our engagement survey, we reduced the number of questions, really focused on kind of that career growth aspect and what people are looking for there, which I think has then helped us kind of look at different initiatives that are really pertinent to us in our company and kind of do action planning based on that as well.
Yeah. I love those definitions of engagement and how all of you are thinking about it. I particularly love what you said, Tess, about thinking about things across the life cycle. I do think that there are sort of two different ways of thinking about engagement. One is sort of like, what is the individual's need, and sort of like what are the moments where the company really shows up for an employee. there are moments like, when you, throughout the recruiting process, pre-hire, setting the right expectations, onboarding, their first performance review, their first promotion. In all of these moments, you can think about. In all of these moments, you can think about what are the. Maybe I should start over. Anyways, I just started by saying that DeShawn and Tess are brilliant, and their explanation of engagement is incredible. But I do think that you can also think about engagement across two different dimensions. One is sort of what is like each individual's employees need, and how do you want them to feel in any given moment. Sometimes I think people often think about just new hire onboarding and then in some ways they sort of like, okay, the employee is onboarded into their job, and in some ways you kind of forget about them. And I think with that people get disengaged. Or you remember once a year for an engagement survey. But you can consistently be proactive by thinking about these various moments in the employee's life cycle and how you want them to feel in these moments, and continuously pulse. Are they actually feeling that way? And so you can think about it in the employee dimension, and then you can also think about it in sort of like more of a departmental dimension, and sort of like how aligned is everyone feeling with your mission? Are they excited to come to work and do the thing that they're employed to do? And I think really that's sort of, in some ways that's how I think about engagement, is sort of like, is this, certainly there are always good days and bad days at work, but fundamentally, do you still feel good about what you're doing and you want to keep doing it tomorrow, the next week, a year from now, et cetera?
Deborah, I really appreciate that. And how,
Yeah.
oh, all right, here I am again. So Deborah, I really do appreciate that when it comes to looking at it at the different dimensions, and then also how you talk about the feeling that our people get. One thing, at SpotHero is, not everyone in Chicago drives, right? And so not everyone understands the driver experience. And so one thing that we started doing is to connect people to that feeling of, when I, look for a parking spot, I'm able to find it in a location that I want at the price that I want. One thing that we do now in our all hands meetings is we play back the voice of the customer. So our customer heroes, we basically record some of those. We get, of course, the permission from the driver to share those in our all hands meetings, to connect them to what our common purpose is. And so that even though they may not drive, they may not understand that aspect, but they learn the good things and they learn what the not so good things, so that way it can connect them to the actual work that they're doing and what we're trying to accomplish at SpotHero.
Yeah, and let me know if I need the mic. Okay. Yeah, I definitely agree with that, DeShawn, and I think that, you were talking about, Deborah, the kind of feeling that people are feeling with engagement, and I think although the world is changing out there really quickly and evolving every day, I think the common thread that we want to find in engagement is kind of that purpose and that impact that we're having, and making sure that when we're running things like engagement surveys or gathering feedback from people, that we're thinking about the purpose and the impact, and specifically what's important to your company and your organization. Like I mentioned, career growth. That's really something that we pride ourselves on at Betterment, and that we want to make sure people feel like they have that opportunity there, that they have internal mobility opportunities. And so that's something where if we scored low on an engagement survey around that, we really want to focus on that, which that might not be the same for every company, but I think kind of finding your niche, and as a company what you care about, and then also what's going to drive the most impact is really critical. So
that was great. I think y'all hit on so many important points. One of the main ones is that engagement is so elusive because it's different at each company, each org, each department, each individual, but what each of you kind of tapped on was the importance of being aligned to purpose, and then teasing out what's like one or two things that's going to have the biggest impact. And I love some of the examples that you talked about, like career pathing. Like that's a tangible thing that we can get really clear on. So that's awesome, great tips for us. But also I heard, in tough economic climates, engagement's often seen as a nice-to-have thing, like something we'll revisit when times are better. But y'all have unlocked how to connect with your executive teams to really make this come to life. What tips do you have for our audience today to make engagement matter and really connect it to the business?
Yeah, I think with that one, it can be tough sometimes. I mean, I think I'm lucky to work at a company now that I think really sees the people team and people programs as kind of a strategy and part of the business. That's not always the case, and sometimes it's hard to kind of push that forward. And so I think, what has been helpful for me in those situations has been, really thinking about your audience, knowing what they care about, kind of speaking their language. So, for example, if you're talking to your CFO, he might be interested in how much money the company is losing with employee turnover or something like that. So that might be something you want to highlight with that person. And even going a step further, once you have that data showing how employee retention has really saved the company money and increased productivity and engagement, and kind of just highlighting what they care about, and I think that will kind of just make it an easy decision for them to then integrate that into the business as well.
I definitely agree with that. And another thing is keeping it simple. I think a lot of times we use the word engagement and we use our people terms with the business, and it's taking that away and keeping it simple and asking those questions. So some questions could be, what keeps you up at night? Understanding what some of the issues might be, so that way then you can go and get feedback around it. And when you understand what those issues are, typically, depending on who you're talking to, it could be a process issue or a people issue, right? And so then if you understand that, then you can dig a little deeper. And also from that perspective, get focus groups together when you're trying to gather information. So it doesn't always have to be a formalized way, but it can be, as Deborah said, throughout the journey of the employee experience.
Just building on what both DeShawn and Tess said, I would say, I guess I would challenge the notion that engagement needs to cost anything. Sparrow's existed since the end of 2019, so we've sort of only existed in troubled economic times, I would say. And with that, I think so much of keeping people engaged and keeping people excited, it is sort of like consistent communication, documentation, transparency, and sort of so people understand what. And then when I say transparency, I don't necessarily mean like share everything. I mean like documentation around key points like how do you think about compensation? How do you think about promotions? These sorts of things make it easier for managers and everyone else to have conversations around this. With that, I would say that when communicating with, like both of you said, I would say in communicating with executives, or even when I'm communicating with my executives, really the best thing you can do is sort of get outside of your own head, don't use any jargon, and just sort of think, if I were in their shoes, what are they thinking about? What metrics are they measured on? Is it customer happiness? Is it revenue? And try to tie the need for this back to customer happiness, revenue, sort of like whatever it is that is important to them. And that's sort of the easiest way to bridge the gap very quickly, because then they don't have to say, well, how does this tie to X? It's just obvious, and then you can be working on the same team right out of the gate.
I love that. Keep it simple, meet your audience where they're at, and let's not use HR jargon. Let's just speak the business language and understand our audience and adapt to that.
As it turns out, none of us know what engagement is either.
Right? We're all just figuring it out. But I think you all had some really great tips on how to keep your pulse on the organization, how to keep the conversations going, so that it's not just this once a year thing where you're running a big survey. How else do you kind of specifically or strategically build these initiatives, your engagement muscles into the rhythm of the business, and Can you share like some even more specific examples for our lovely audience here?
For us, I would go back to the idea of thinking of things as sort of a life cycle and trying to specifically address, trying to specifically communicate what the goal of an engagement survey is and what action items you will take from that, because you're going to ask questions about a lot of things and you're not going to be able to action all of those things. But for us, I would say whenever possible, it's difficult as you grow, because at first, kind of it's easy to plan the first 6 months of an employee's journey. You can probably plan the first 12 months of an employee journey, but then, I mean, what is going to be important then? 4 years, 5 years? But the more that you can do that and the more structure that you can provide around that, it really can make a huge impact in making sure that you're consistently providing a great experience for everyone, no matter what their background is.
Yeah, and to go along with what Deborah said, and the way that we do work, so how do you bring it to life in your one-on-ones that you have with your leaders? How do your leaders bring it to life in their team meetings from a company level? How do you ensure that you're bringing that as a part of your all hands meetings and you're talking about it? And so it's not just that you are you're gathering all of that feedback, but then guess what happens? You gather all that feedback, but you're not going to tell your people what actually is happening and what you're doing, to create change. So thinking about it in the way of work, and then also if you have communications that go out, we heard from you and this is what's happening, this is what we're doing. So finding those different ways to bring it to life in that way. And then also, one thing that I've done in my past is creating action planning committees as well. And so with that will give potential folks learning opportunities, that will give them the ability to have the ability for visibility if they don't have that. And we've looked at our top talent at times and reached out to their leader and said, hey, do you think this person would be great for this? And then giving them, so that also brings it into career development for them as well. So those are definitely some ways that you could bring it into the normal way of working.
Yeah, definitely. I'll echo what both DeShawn and Deborah said. I think, there's a lot of ways that you can gather feedback, and I think people are willing to give the feedback if you're willing to listen, and most importantly, like you both said, if you're willing to action it. So I think that action part is extremely important. In my role as an HR business partner, I'm lucky enough to get, kind of be those boots on the ground and really listening to managers give me feedback every day. And so I have a very good pulse on what's going on on my teams and in my organization. And so I think having kind of those healthy feedback loops, whether it's business partners or managers asking pointed questions, not just, do you have feedback for me, but asking, what's challenging to you right now and how can I support, and asking questions that are really more complex than just answering yes or no. So but yeah, always going back to that sort of action planning, and I think you're doing more damage asking questions if you're not actioning, and I think it's okay to action maybe only one or two things, but being transparent about that and being open about kind of what is important to your company, what you can action, and kind of what you're going to do going forward. So.
This is something that in the prep for the panel we had a bit of a debate on. Of whether the answer is shortening engagement surveys or having longer engagement surveys. At Sparrow, we have a longer engagement survey. We use Lattice's full battery of questions, and we're looking at basically all of them, and it's allowed us to find a lot of insights that I never would have guessed. These are things like there was one engagement survey where it seemed like one of our lower scores was, do people trust the decisions of senior leadership? And we looked at all the other areas of the survey, and it seemed like everyone loves their manager, everyone trusts their manager, but they don't necessarily, but the real difference was by manager. The people with great managers also trusted the decisions of senior leadership, and the people with less experienced managers, or managers who were struggling a little bit more, did not trust the decisions of senior leadership, which fundamentally comes down to this sort of like very core human element of like, you like the people who you know. If you see them regularly, you know them professionally, you also know them personally, you know all the ways that they're great. But it's possible, but that you don't necessarily know what their information they're not passing on to you, and what information what ideas of yours that they're not challenging. And in some ways, the goal of a really experienced manager is not only to support their reports, but also to cascade information down from other elements of the leadership team and give any IC some visibility into what is going on across the rest of the company. So that is my plug for more questions. However, I think Tess, in our conversations, very duly noted, or I think it might have been Mia as well, that you can actually cut those questions. You can see what is the same from from engagement survey to engagement survey, and then maybe you can cut down the number of questions you're asking to make it easier for people to answer, and maybe you won't get new information from those questions. But my plug is at least in the early days with more questions, sometimes you can get data where you never would have guessed that. Like I talked to many other founders of companies who also are offended by their "do you trust the decisions of senior leadership" scores, but they're not also asking the manager question, so they don't know.
Yeah, the power of how certain questions come together and tell a full story is that cannot be lost. So I think looking at the trends over time, are we actually seeing differences in these questions? And then maybe we can drop some and replace them with something that's more relevant, especially in these economic times. So I think, DeShawn, Tess, you have different cadences for your surveys. Do you want to speak more to that?
Yeah, so we have, we did shorten our engagement survey because we wanted to be focused on what is it that we're trying to accomplish as a business, and how do people feel, when about their work, right, and about not necessarily coming to the office, but coming to work and their experience. We're in a hybrid mode at the moment. Our cadence is we actually just ran our full engagement survey just in April, and then we do a pulse towards the end of the year. However, we listen in many different ways. We listen when people are leaving. We listen when people are onboarding. We listen throughout the whole employee journey, so that way it's not just that event of the survey that we have. And then, for example, one thing that we've learned is that, and Deborah alluded to this earlier, is making sure that everyone knows and the communication of policies and things that, managers need to know in order to be impactful, to their teams. And learning that through conversations, and these are just one-on-one conversations that we have with our people, one-on-one conversations that we have with leaders, people that are leaving. Hey, we didn't know this. Where can we find it? And one thing that we've done is we've actually on our intranet for managers, because they're the first point of contact, when our employees have questions, it won't be us, the people team, it'll be them. We built a portal for our people managers. When it comes to our total rewards, we've noticed that there have been a lot of questions around that. And so, around as a manager, what do I have to, how can I help our people? So we created this intranet so that way they had all the manager expectations all in one place. So that way if they have questions about compensation, they have questions about career development, they have questions about flexible work. Oh, I want to move to New York. Well, maybe you can't move to New York because, of our location strategy. So ensuring that managers, they're in the first line, so that way they're equipped to answer those questions, so that way it can save us time. But also that comes from listening to what our people need and what they want.
Yeah, definitely. And I will respond to Deborah in that. I think it matters, what works for your company. I think, it depends. If you're a smaller organization and, to your point, Deborah, like you want to get a lot of information to kind of figure out, okay, where do we need to put our focus? So I think again, going back to like the initial question, I think it just depends on your organization, and you can kind of craft that strategy with your people leaders. As far as our cadence, we do a once a year annual engagement survey. That has, worked well for us. We also do a couple other touch points. So we have, onboarding surveys, we have exit surveys, and we kind of try and align that data to kind of see if there's any areas that we are noticing trends. And then, like I said before, we also, our business partner team's very involved in the day-to-day, very involved in gathering feedback, and kind of we're expected to then relay that feedback to our leaders, and they're very interested in what's going on in the day-to-day. So I think those are areas where you can kind of gather that informal feedback without necessarily, taking a survey. And I think people, when you build that trust with people, they are very open with you and how they feel. And so then you can kind of see, when you look at the engagement survey and you see the results, you can kind of see, oh, is that what I'm hearing on my teams, or is that different? How is that lining up? Can I provide any more context, any more additional, background that will kind of help us then craft a better strategy for action? So
This is great. And what I'm hearing you all say is that engagement surveys, it's almost always on. You are always you have your feelers out there, you're listening to your employees. So how do you simplify the action planning when you want to make sure that you're being transparent and saying, we're taking your feedback, we're making action? How do you make that really simple when you've got varying degrees of different team sizes and needs?
One thing that this is something that we've been thinking a lot about recently, and I think that a lot of it comes down to sort of setting the right expectations from the start. Like, what are we trying to do with this? This is something we do whenever we put out a benefits survey. I think it's something we could do even better with engagement surveys, as well as just making really clear to everyone. Like, remember, there might be, if you have 200 people in your company, there might be 200 different most important issues that people are thinking about that are most important to them. But you're not going to be able to action 200 things. And I think sometimes just reminding people that you might not get to their thing. But your goal here is to create goals that are going to be most effective for as much of the company as possible. And basically everyone has been a part of some sort of collective community, family, something like that before. They understand the idea that it's possible that their pet project might not come first. As long as you're setting the right expectations afterwards and then following up to say exactly what it is you are going to do with something realistic. It's possible the right expectations is we are only going to pick one thing to action before the next survey. And as long as you set those expectations and follow up, then most people will be okay with that.
Yeah, definitely setting those expectations is important, Deborah. And I think, when it comes to, let's say, your action planning, you have different levels. You have at the company level, you have it at the department level, then you might have it at the team level. Get people involved. I think that's another way that you can keep it simple and have them be the driver of making the change. An example of this is one of my other companies that I worked for. We actually had, I worked with the leader, got all the results, had a conversation with the leader about the results, and then we pulled the department together and we did a focus group. So the way this focus group worked is the leader was in there, introduced me, the leader left. And then the people felt comfortable enough to say, this is what's happening, and I'm asking questions, trying to dig a little deeper and get more focused on why they were thinking what they were thinking, why did they answer this way, and came to find out that, guess what? One of them was, I don't feel I'm getting recognized for the work that I'm doing. And then we were able to build out what is an action plan, what can we do? And it can be done locally or can be done globally, if that's something that, from a global perspective, that is necessary.
Yeah, I think we definitely, at Betterment, we look at the sort of company org-wide perspective and also the departmental. Usually when I'm working with my leaders, we want to pick one or two things. We usually try and keep it, like you said, DeShawn, keep it simple. We'll get bogged down with too many if we pick 3, 4, 5. So we'll pick a couple things to focus on, and usually it will be at the org-wide level, so something that really aligns with the company's like mission, vision, values, or a really business-critical goal that we need to hit that year. So that's kind of where we focus company-wide, and then we'll kind of double-click down from there and look at the departments and see, are there any hot spots, are there any areas that we really want to focus on, and then we do always make sure, though, to ladder up whatever we're focusing on there to the greater goal and to the values and the mission, and just making sure that there's that alignment. I think that really helps create buy-in and also makes it more purpose-driven and meaningful, that you know you're working on something that's then in turn helping the company as well.
Totally. And how can you not get your executive team bought in when you're aligned to the mission, vision, values, the purpose? And oftentimes that's like, how do we make this business successful? And we all know performance is driven by engagement, and engagement drives performance, which brings in more revenue. So it's a win-win. But that's really hard when we're all being asked to do more with less. What do you think HR teams should just stop doing to free up their time to, really drive engagement? And do you think there's anything that's outdated that needs to be rethought?
I think I'm going to echo what I think this entire, conference is about, which is technology and AI and just leveraging that. I think Sarah and others were speaking about it earlier and really leaning into that and not having fear about that, but really just honestly being excited about the change and to learn about it. And so I think in previous roles, I've worked in a people operations capacity, and, I've always felt very bogged down by that work. And, I'm focused on just entering details manually into a system, which is, extremely time consuming and not something that I want to be doing. So I think things like that, where you can really leverage technology or leverage AI to then free up yourself to be working on things that are more strategic and that are really going to have an impact, and something that is just innately human that like a machine could never do. So I think that's what is important for us to kind of lean in on and focus on, and just be excited about the new technology and looking forward to it and learning about it. So
I definitely echo that, Tess. And with technology, there's so many things that you can do. There are integrations. There are workflows. So if you're not using the workflows for self-service or employee self-service, manager self-service, anything like that, go ahead and use that. Don't be afraid of that. It's not that you're giving the keys away. There's approvals. So, it's not just going to get approved as soon as the manager goes in and says, I want to give someone an increase. That's not going to happen if you set it up the right way. So don't be afraid. And then also, one thing that freeing us up, AI, so I'll give an example. There are, we want career development for all of our people. That's something that comes up in our engagement survey all the time. And what does that really mean? And so we actually built out career tracks. Well, for some, if you have the Lattice platform, there's some nice little templates in there. But if they're not any in there, one thing that I've done is I've actually used AI to help me build out. We have our core competencies. What are the functional competencies for a specific area? Because more than likely, if you're working at a smaller business, maybe the leaders or the managers haven't built anything like that before. And so using AI to say, hey, what are the most relevant skills or competencies or capabilities needed for this specific area? And then I build it with our core competencies, and I use it as a starting point for the leader. Does it make sense? And we sit and we have a conversation. What it does is it changes the time frame. It takes probably less than 3 weeks, from the time we're able to, have the initial conversation, build everything, and then get it, upload it into the platform. And that's something different than having to go and do all of the research and then put it all together, then present it, and that could take months. And so what has that done? That's given you time back, and that's one thing that we don't get back is time. So getting that back so that way you can focus on the things that are really important is really awesome.
Those are such great points, and I especially love that last one, DeShawn, of that it's true. You don't get your time back. Everything, even if it doesn't cost money, everything you do costs time. And no one has infinite time. In troubled economic times, you probably actually have less time than usual, and including as well as less money than usual. But I think the question sort of comes down to how do you spend that time? And I think the two most impactful things that I've seen are, one, really investing in documentation. Because again, if it's written somewhere, that's one less person you have to explain it to. You can always point people to the portal. I love this idea of DeShawn says he put together this whole portal related to total rewards. You can do that for essentially everything for your managers. And the more you're able to educate them, which is an investment, but the more you're able to educate and enable them to some extent, the less you have massive compliance issues later. And second, so I would say, really those are the two things. One, document, and two, help your managers sort of be your second force, your second set of arms. Because realistically, when something really goes wrong, it's not going to go straight to HR. I remember I was talking to someone who they had their first we had our first offsite, and afterwards I was like, no HR issues. And someone was like, you're not going to know about them for a week. As it turns out, there were HR issues. Not very many. We're a good group. But with that, realistically, the manager is going to find out about it first, then HR is going to find out about it. If you're an executive, you might never find out about it. So I think just acknowledging that group dynamic can really do a lot to have everyone have more support.
Oh my goodness, yeah. So documenting, being really clear on expectations for your managers, how do we enable our managers? And I think we talked about it earlier today of really translating that strategy, and the managers that are actually communicating the best have the higher engagement scores and that stronger trust with leadership. So how can we use AI to make more time to translate that strategy back down? And because, like you said, Deborah, humans are gonna need HR to help out when things don't go as planned. So embrace AI. It's gonna make our jobs easier and make more space. I think, Tess, you said it earlier in one of our prep sessions that the machines can't do people work. So how do we just work differently to embrace AI? Yeah.
Yeah, and I did just want to comment on what you said, Deborah, about the kind of documentation piece, which I think is really important because it made me think of, an employee handbook, for example. Who reads those? Probably nobody except for us. We know what's in there and we know it by heart, but the employee population, they're not going to read that whole document. But what they could do is put that into an AI system that will then spit out and explain to them what the policies are. And we could even go a step further and then the HR team thinking, well, maybe we can adjust the handbook to where it's a little bit more simple so that people can read it and it's not a 30, 40-page document. It's just, a 10-page document that just outlines these things very clearly. And so that even is kind of empowering employees too, not just managers, but empowering employees to then have those tools in their hands to where they really deeply understand what the leave policies are, or what to do if there is an incident at an onsite and things like that. So I think I really like that point about the documentation that Deborah brought up.
I love everything you said, except leave policy should not be less than 10 pages.
Say more.
The reasoning, I actually, my business is leave, and I actually love to see a long leave policy. The reason is, usually when people have a very short leave policy, they're leaving out things that are very important. Usually it's like, okay, we have this parental leave defined, but realistically speaking, a parental leave is kind of like part disability leave, part bonding leave. Something could go wrong. It could become more of a long-term disability. Maybe that blend, maybe it ends up becoming a caregiving leave. Realistically speaking, because life happens and unusual things happen, you actually want everything defined. Like, you need to imagine all of the things that can go wrong, and you want all of it in your leave policy. Not everyone is going to read every leave policy, but it does mean when they find themselves in one of those situations, that sort of unthinkable situations, they don't have to go to HR and say, like, one policy I always like talking about is safe leave. It's for victims of domestic violence and crime. No one wants to go to their HR team and say, hello, I am a victim of domestic violence. No, and so I need time off. But if you have something like that defined in your policy, when that moment happens, they know exactly what to do. They can even just say, hey, I had a crime. I need to take a couple of sick days. And they can go on with that. And it actually ends up being sort of a signaling mechanism as well that can be really helpful for employee retention and employee recruiting, because people see, oh, okay, my employer has actually thought about these situations. What happens if I have child care issues? What happens if I have a miscarriage? And just knowing that they're not going to have to do the emotional labor of developing a new policy with you can do so much to help employees feel cared for and engaged. And with that, this was all sort of a tangent related to leave. But I would say that the same thing is true when you're thinking about promotion policies, when you're thinking about what, how you think about total rewards. The more you have written down, even if it's not something that they're going to read today, you've at least set the expectations somewhere. Maybe that employee hasn't read it. Maybe that employee's best friend hasn't read it. But maybe their best friend read it. At which point, it does make its way into the ethos, and it can be really helpful in setting expectations and bringing people back to a sort of grounded place.
I love it. And with Lattice's AI assistant, if you have a clear documentation plan, then employees can ask those sensitive questions and not really interact when they don't feel comfortable. So I love that, Deborah. Thank you. Okay, I think we have time for one last question to wrap us up. Engagement looks so different at your company size and maturity. What works for a lean startup isn't going to work for a 5,000 employee company. So maybe one of you can speak in our last minute or so. How do you tailor your approach without losing impact?
I think there's been a common thread here around all of this, and it's around listening. So I've worked at a company of 25 people. I've worked at a company of hundreds, thousands of people. And it comes down to listening. And if you can listen to your people and meet them where they are, it doesn't have to be a formal engagement survey. You can sit in a room and just talk, and talk about what's happening. If you can do that, no matter the size of company you're in, not just listen, but also then where can you action? If you do that, then no matter the company size you're in, you're gonna hopefully get more engagement from your people because they see that you're actually doing something and that you care. Because that, at the end of the day, we are people, and we do care, and we love, the people that we're supporting and partnering with.
I see the clock ticking down, so I'll make it quick. But I think also you talked about action planning, and we talked about that a lot. I think that's an area where if you are a smaller company, you might think about just getting people in a room to brainstorm like what we can do differently, as opposed to doing what we were talking about before, where you're doing departmental initiatives and then team initiatives and things like that. So it might just look different, based on how large your company is, also the culture of the company, like all of that. And that kind of brings us full circle to what we were saying at the beginning, that it's going to be bespoke to what, is right for your company and kind of your vision for that. So.
I love it. So regardless of your company culture, I think some core tenets still stay true. Lead with transparency, align to the business goals, and keep it simple. So hopefully y'all learned a little something today. Please be sure to scan here if you have any questions or you need your SHRM credits. And just thank you to this amazing panel. You all are a wealth of information.